Доброго дня.
Good afternoon, everyone. The topic of the next briefing: first, conclusions of the Human Rights House's international mission to Crimea. Our guests are Tetyana Reviako, representative of Belarus Human Rights House; Kyrylo Yekymov, representative of Educational Human Rights House in Chernihiv; Daria, Svyrydova, lawyer, Ukrainian, Helsinki Human Rights Union; and moderator of today's discussion is Tetyana Pechonchyk, head of the Human Rights Information Center, member of the Human Rights House Crimea. Welcome. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you for your interest to our event that is dedicated to the first conclusions of the Human Rights House's international mission to Crimea. The visit happened on the 14th of September till 18th of September 2018. So we decided to use this time in order to share with you our first impressions about Crimea and the situation, how it is viewed by the human rights houses. So the representatives of human rights houses from Ukraine, from Azerbaijan and Belarus took part in this mission, and we paid attention to the human rights freedoms, and also we focused our attention and had the opportunity to have some activities in Crimea, and also we communicated with the lawyers and human rights defenders. Also we paid attention to the access of human rights activists to the occupied Crimea. This trip was organized by the Center of Center of Information for Human Rights, and also with the support of People in Need organization and also Human Rights House Foundation. So this was the first mission of the Human Rights Houses, and we entered Crimea declaring our goal openly, and we wanted to verify the opportunity for work in Crimea and also to help other human rights activists to travel to Crimea in order to document the violations of human rights. So we have 16 houses in 11 countries that are in Europe, in Caucasus and Balkans. The house is in Oslo, and also we have a Geneva office and representative office in Tbilisi and Geneva. So 3 houses delegated the representatives to this mission. Before going to our colleagues, Kyrylo and Tetyana, who are on the mission, I would like to give the floor to Daria Svyrydova from Ukrainian Helsinki Human Rights Union, and she helped to prepare this mission. And I would like to ask Dasha to tell us about how this access is provided to NGOs, how to travel to Crimea from the times of occupation, and why this visit that happened is really important. Thank you, Tetyana. Thank you, dear colleagues. Thank you for this attention to this really important event. During the last 4 years of occupation, everyone understands that Crimea became a gray area, big place of detention for 2.5 million people of Ukraine, who, due to sanctions and other things, were deprived to bank services and other services. Also, transport communication was stopped, and also, what is more important, from the start of occupation in the territory of Crimea, there is no monitoring for human rights violations. From the start of occupation, there were only 2 missions, the representatives of the Council of Europe. They traveled to Crimea, and they had the aim to study the situation connected with human rights. Also, it was attended by the mission, by the delegation from Turkey. But practically, as of today, we have a systemic problem of access for international missions in the territory of Crimea. And this topic is highlighted in many documents of the Council of Europe and also in the resolutions of the UNO. So the main recommendation that is included in the majority of reports of international organizations concerning occupied Crimea is the requirement to Russian power to provide unimpeded access to the territory of Crimea to international human rights missions and human rights groups that had the aim to study the situation concerning human rights in the territory of Crimea. Also recently this week, as I remember, a new report was presented concerning the situation concerning human rights in Crimea and Sevastopol, prepared by a human rights mission in Ukraine. And one of the recommendations in this report is the access for international missions to Crimea. So Russia does not provide the mandate, and it is difficult to get this action through this mandate. So missions cannot go to Crimea to get this mandate, and so international missions, they should get this access, and we would like to show that we should not only speak about it, we should provide proper mechanisms to get to Crimea. And human rights houses, foundation, it unites many houses, and we would like to show that this visit is possible, and I hope that our colleagues will share their opinion about this visit and what is important. I believe that there were international human rights activists and a mission that was able to get to Crimea and that was able to see the human rights situation there. This mission becomes the voice of those people who in Crimea who are deprived of their voice because of the actions of the occupants, who do not want the leak of information from Crimea concerning human rights violations. So these people can bring this information to light. And one more aspect that is really important. We speak a lot about entrance to Crimea for international missions, but in 2015, unfortunately, Ukraine created conditions that do not facilitate the access. So there is an order of entry and exit that the order established by the Cabinet of Ministers, and this order and we provide recommendations to the government because this order it does not help in provision of access to the missions because, for example, our mission, we could spend 2-3 days for monitoring, but we were forced to wait for this permit, and we spent time and we just waited for the provision of the permit. So you should come and to submit the document, then you should go and to get the permit or rejection to get to this territory, and all the documents should be in the Ukrainian, and the foreigner cannot submit this document in the consulate of Ukraine in his own country. He cannot do this online. So the change of the procedure should happen that would simplify the entrance to Crimea, and in order that all human rights defenders could travel there in order to observe and report on the human rights situation in Crimea. So there were representatives in the mission, the citizens of Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Belarus, and Ukraine. And for Ukrainians, we do not need special permits, but the representatives of other countries, they got such permits from migration service, and the mission was able to travel to Crimea from the mainland Ukraine according to Ukrainian law, and one of the aim was to test whether it is possible to travel there adhering to national legislation, and to test how this access works from the Russian side and what obstacles may be. The work in Crimea was active, and these 4 days of work, representatives of the group were able to hold more than 20 meetings, and about 50 people attended, the relatives of political prisoners, journalists, human rights activists, and a big massive of information was collected, so people came with fresh interesting views, and then the report will be created and it will be made public in October, and there will be detailed analysis that was documented by the mission. And now I would like to ask Ms. Reviako to share her first impressions from the visit to Crimea, and maybe to provide some assessment of the situation there. Thank you. I will speak Russian. Maybe it would be better than if I spoke Belarusian. I'm really glad that you have such an attention to this work that we've done with our colleagues from the human rights houses, and I believe that this work is really important, especially for those people who are in Crimea now. First impression I had from the entrance to Crimea, when I asked a Russian border guard or official about them, he said, no, you don't need migration card, you are ours, he said. And in our country, we seriously discuss analytical prognosis by Russian analysts that for Belarusian citizens, Crimean scenario is okay. And for me, this was really painful to hear that they, Russian border guards, that they assess that my country is their country. So this is my first impression. The second one is that they didn't forget Ukrainian language. And when I was asked, they ask, do you have permit for temporary stay? For the stay in the temporarily occupied territories? I said, yes, I have such a permit. And I was asked about it by border guards while entering and exiting the peninsula. So they didn't forget Ukrainian language. In this short period of time, 4 working days, a lot of meetings were held, and we have really a lot of impressions that just poured on us. A lot of information was provided, and we are not ready to provide assessment and recommendations and conclusions of the mission. Maybe we may say that now we may only share our impressions, maybe those messages from those people we've met. We had more than 20 meetings attended by 50 people, and as Tetyana said, these were journalists, activists, who were convicted in criminal prosecutions, and activists who were tried for administrative cases, and also those who were prosecuted for activity in Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar organizations. And so we had also separate meeting and separate impressions. So we've met political prisoners' relatives and their children. People came with their children because they do not have anyone to babysit. So they really have a lot of household duties and other duties because their relatives are in prison now and cannot help. So for 22 years in my country, we had political prisoners. And for me, this topic, I understand this topic at the professional level. This is a painful topic. But I was impressed by the scope, by the level, and by those cruel methods that are used now in Crimea. Following information online from Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar resources, those that one can find. Online, it is difficult to estimate the scope, and what we saw, I cannot fight, let's say, this understanding how deep and systemic at this moment how difficult to find the way out of the situation concerning the restoration of rights of many, many people who are there. As Tetyana said, we focused on 4 sections: the freedom of expression, the freedom of assembly, the opportunity to be a human rights activist. Also, there was information about other violations, about independence or non-independence of judiciary, and the use of torture and inhumane treatment, and violations of the standards of detention in detention facilities and other human rights violations. But for those missions that will come next, there will be more information to provide to Ukrainian community and international community and to international organizations on human rights. But the situation there, you know, there is gray area, but I didn't expect it to be so gray. I give the floor to Kyrylo. He is the representative of Educational Human Rights House in Chernihiv. In order, he shared the information with us. I am Kyrylo. Once again, thank you for being with us today. I believe it is really important to bring attention to this region, to this topic of human rights violations, massive violations of human rights in Crimea. Concerning first impressions, speaking openly, this was emotional trip. It was a hard experience. For me, it is difficult to formulate my thoughts in some good sentences because of the high level of what is going on in Crimea concerning human rights. And maybe further on, I will be able to speak about it during Q&A session. What I want to state separately, evidently, now, for 4 years, the wall, this metaphorical wall, it becomes higher and higher, this wall around Crimea. In some places, this is the real wall. And it impedes us, it creates obstacles for us to see what is going on there, and I hope that our mission will bring additional attention to the situation there. It is evident that all those cases, grave violations of human rights, procedural violations, everything what we saw and what our media say about, these are systemic, well-planned events. They have centralized character. We see that the different actions are carried out by different bodies, and these actions are coordinated. And I believe that there is no random action. We see that these actions are well planned. Speaking with people in Crimea, everything looks differently. This is completely different experience, and no text can provide this feeling. I believe that people should speak more about it, because at the international arena and in Ukraine, this topic of human rights violations in Crimea, it is not properly highlighted. I would like to follow. So the topic of Crimea, it disappears from the agenda of international organizations. That's why this documenting of information is important. The human rights houses and people in need, we will use this information to inform international community, and inside the countries we will inform on human rights violations in Crimea. In October we'll have a report, and you may find more details in this report concerning persecutions that were recorded by our mission. And before giving the floor to journalists, I would like to read the words of the senior advisor, Anna Tusvik-Bonda, who sent her recommendations. She said it is really important that the situation concerning human rights in Crimea was known to in the countries of the world, and these people from human rights houses were able to document the data there and to hear the voices of local human rights activists, and the information plays the key role in the provision of positive changes to people of Crimea. And we wait for the resolution of important issues in connection with this visit of human rights houses. At some platforms, international platforms, they say that it is difficult to deal with the situation, and Azerbaijan and Belarus, they were able to compare the situation in Crimea and in their own country, and it is really important that these people, they saw the situation with their own eyes, and they can inform properly international community. And this is not just the view of the media or some internet sources. This is the information from the first hands. This is the uniqueness of this mission. And now I give the floor to those who are present here today. Please, if you'd like to, you may ask a question. Are there any other mechanisms to help political prisoners and the residents of Crimea, I mean, except provision of information? Thank you for this question. Yes, there are mechanisms, and we may say that now there are some political mechanisms, the mechanisms of monitoring, informing, legal mechanisms about monitoring. we say that the access to Crimea for international organizations, this is really important because they can independently highlight the situation there. About legal actions, those victims, they should address for protection. They should address to human rights organizations and to law enforcement bodies and international courts. And the Ministry of Justice prepared and submitted to European Human Rights Court. They submitted the big declaration about the persecution of people by Crimea, by Kremlin in Crimea. In connection with the armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and also by helping those who are in Crimea and persecution, we help. So sanctions also help to stop violations against people who are in the occupied territories. And we understand that Russian Federation is responsible for all violations in the occupied territories, and international institutions should establish facts, and international missions should be able to go to these territories, and this will be prevention for violations in Crimea. Also, it is important what Ukraine does. For us, it is important that Ukraine should be in this process, and once again, I would like to state that we repeatedly addressed the government in order to simplify the access to Crimea, and now we still have this permits system, and this is the barrier for entering to Crimea for international organizations. And one more important aspect is the systemic policy to help political prisoners' families. We do not have proper legislation for regulation of the issues. We know that the Ministry on Occupied Territories, it prepares some draft, but we know that such families and the families say that they need help because their fathers or husbands, they were sent into prison, and we believe that Ukraine is able to provide more help to these families. One more question. Khalepov Ruslan, Crimea channel. I have a question. So as a journalist, I hear activists from Crimea, they say that they are under surveillance, and you are the participants of this visit. Maybe there was some surveillance, maybe some bodies interfered in your work. Thank you for your question. We believe that this could be the case. And before the mission, we had such a time. We elaborated the system of security that would help us to avoid such situations. And as I believe we were able to use this knowledge to a large extent. We didn't use the same transport. So these were internal elements of security we used. At the same time, when we entered, they found us, and they brought us to some place at the Russian border, and they tried to find out our aims, and we didn't hide our aims. We said that we will carry out human rights research, and our passports were scanned, and we were waiting. That we thought that they won't allow us to cross the border, but then they allowed us to enter, and this was a real bonus for us, because we didn't expect this when we, one by one, were questioned. So we do not know why such a decision was taken to allow us to go there. Then we expected that there will be some attention, but we previously elaborated such a system that helped us to avoid this. We believe that we will be monitored, that there will be attention to the people with whom we met. And we know only one such fact when we, our colleagues, were surveyed, and this attention was connected with the person with whom they met. We thought that on our way back, there will be excessive attention to us, because they allowed us to enter. Maybe they wanted to find out what we were doing there, and we made some steps in order to provide our security, but there were no in-depth questioning. I would like to say that at the moment, I can only speak about now. They afraid of journalists. I passed this procedure first, and they are afraid of journalists more than human rights activists. Maybe they didn't understand the intention, the aim of our mission. That's why we were allowed. Only once we faced some trouble. So it is worth noting that we are not James Bonds. We are not experts in operative things. So maybe we just didn't see something. But we didn't notice anything suspicious. We expected that we will have big problems while entering. We believed that we will be detained in administrative process. But we successfully crossed the border, the line, and when we successfully completed the work, we expected that we will have some questions on our way back. But it didn't happen, and it is difficult for me to say why. So everyone knows what journalists do, but what human rights activists do, maybe people do not know about it. Maybe this is a vague idea for them in order to feel some threat. I would like to add that we were concerned not only about our security, but also we were concerned because of the security of people we've met. That's why during today's conference we won't name those people because of security reasons, their own personal security. And in the report, not all names will be mentioned. I mean the names of those people with whom we've met. For us, this was a really important element, and I believe that we will be able to complete our task, to have their trust in us. Please, other questions, dear colleagues, if you have. If there are no questions, sorry, one more. I have many questions. First question. There is such a stereotype, and maybe this is correct, that those who are opponents of the Crimea, I mean that only Crimean Tatars are opponents of Kremlin. Is this correct? What is your idea? And what about ecological catastrophe in Crimea, whether it is a real ecological catastrophe? Thank you for your question. First, maybe I will start with the ecological catastrophe. On the way back, there was only Chingar checkpoint open when we entered, and we returned through Pechonchyk checkpoint. And we went through the place where there is this plant that had this catastrophe. We didn't have such an aim to carry out research. We are not ecology experts, and we cannot speak about the scope of this catastrophe, but we may only say that the city looks like it is November. The leaves fell, and some trees are partly green, partly yellow, so there is a strict line on the trees, and between the yellow part and the green part, and many people cover the face, and we spoke with the people there, and they say that they get this information, and this is also about the freedom of speech. They say that Crimean media, they do not say about this, and they only get information because I cite the Crimea is under sanctions, and they use so they get information about it through unofficial sources, not from the media, not from the Crimean media. So Russian border guards, they work using protective equipment, and so they have notices about chemical contamination, and on Russian checkpoint, in Russian and Ukrainian, and in Russian and Ukrainian, they have the notice about chemical contamination. And people who cross there, they are wearing protective masks. We've met with the relatives of political prisoners. Not only Crimean Tatars were present. That's why you know that there are cases that are well-known, criminal cases. Vladimira Balucha speaking about it. Yes, people are persecuted. Also, we've met with representatives of NGOs, Ukrainian organizations, and they say that this is happening, and this is directed not only against Crimean Tatar people. So interesting observations. The relatives of political prisoners said that there was pressure on the families, and Crimean Tatars, they are united, and they try to help each other. And Ukrainian families, they are not so united in terms of territory, and it is more difficult for them. So I had such an impression that it is more difficult for them. When arrests and searches happen, Crimean Tatars, they go and they provide the stream of this, and it becomes known. And when it happens to Ukrainian activists, maybe there is less support. There is support by activists, by the media, but hundreds of people do not get united. And this is the difference between these persecuted people from different ethnicities. I would like to comment several words. I won't use such a category, more or less, about political persecutions, because even one political prisoner is too much, is too many. If we are speaking about statistics, of course, Crimean Tatar people, they persecuted more, because they live more, so they have more close communities, and I'm really impressed by their solidarity and the level of support to each other. So, yes, Crimean Tatar people, they really suffer from these persecutions. Next question, please. Thank you very much. Gromadzka Radio. I have a question. You said that you had the opportunity to meet the relatives of political prisoners. Have you tried, did you have such a name, maybe to visit some political prisoners? Maybe this is too much. I understand the situation, but maybe if you plan some further meetings, maybe this will be one of your aims. Thank you for your question. No, we didn't meet them. About the situation and the context, we see that among the pressure instruments that are used against political prisoners, their relatives, and people of Crimea on the whole, this is the difficulty in communication with political prisoners. Even lawyers who have rights, procedural rights, because they have the right to communicate with the person whom they defend, even they are limited in this. And relatives are also limited in the visits. They cannot get visits with their relatives. But we didn't have such an aim. You should understand that if relatives cannot get a visit and lawyers cannot do this, so we met with lawyers, and many relatives say that lawyers, this is the only way of communication with those people who were in prison. And this is the source of information about their physical condition, their health. So, so those people who were persecuted and tried in courts, they are trying to communicate with the help of their eyes, just to share this information during court hearings. We've met with people who were persecuted because of political reasons, and their sentences are not connected with the imprisonment, so their sentence was suspended, so they are on home arrest. Those people who are on a home arrest, and if they are such people, so we've met with people like that. One more question. What about clergy? Did you meet with someone? Vladimir Balych is attended by the bishop, and what is the situation with Crimean Tatars? Do they have imams who can visit those prisoners, or maybe some other clergy can visit. Thank you for your question. Religion was not on the focus of our attention, but the topic of our work. So, religious people, they are repressed by some special mechanism. Other cases are fabricated against them. About imams, as I've said, for those who are behind bars, for them it is difficult even to communicate with their lawyers. Not speaking about imams, but I know that even it is difficult for lawyers to get access, and even more difficult for the relatives. I do not know about clergy. Crimean News. I would like to specify. Did you have problems with bringing materials out, photo and video footage? And do you plan? And when will be your next mission? We used accessible modern means that allow not to bring those materials through the border, because we didn't want them to be confiscated or accessible for people whom we did not want to have the access to the materials. And what about your question about future missions? We want this mission to be the first, not the only, and we want to have other missions, and we will negotiate with the representatives of other houses and the Human Rights House Foundation in order to organize these missions in future. And maybe we will go in more detail about some topics that were open during this mission, and maybe we will also focus on other rights, the right for life, the freedom from torture and inhuman treatment, and also the right for fair trial, freedom of religion. So this mission was not able to draw attention to these topics because our mission was limited, only 4 days, and we collected a lot of materials, and we believe that this was big success. One question from me. Please tell us, do you plan to additionally communicate about state bodies with the Ministry of Temporarily Occupied Territories, with Prosecutor's Office of Crimea, to provide your materials to them, or your recommendations, your conclusions, and when do you plan to do this? So we will have a report, an official report, and it will be made public, and we will send it to Ukrainian and international institutions. Yes, we plan to disseminate information about the Ministry of Occupied Territories. If they have a wish, they can initiate such a meeting. The Ministry provided recommendations because of the order, and it provides recommendations for getting the permit. That's why the Ministry knows about the visit of human rights activists, and we are open for communication, but officially it will be in the report, and we will send it to all institutions, and we will provide the recommendations provided by our group. And the important part is that this will be published in October, and this will be also about the needed attention from UN and OSCE, that their role is really important, and also we will provide recommendations to Ukrainian bodies that this order of provision of access, it should be simplified. That should be so people should address through the consulates, through the embassies, to get the access to provide documents not only in Ukrainian, but they should be able to provide documents in their own language. And also recommendations to simplify access to international human rights activists. And the UNO provides recommendations on this, and the government is ready to work on simplification of access to Crimea, and we greet such actions, and we ask to make steps to simplify the access. This mission came to Kiev last week, so people came to Ukraine, and they were not able to move forward because they didn't have, they couldn't get access quicker. And we should simplify this procedure, because power and government of Ukraine should be interested in simplification of this procedure. So your emotions, because of persecutions based on religious and political grounds. So you spoke with those people who suffered. What are your impressions? Thank you for your question. First, this is emotionally difficult, because in the course of such discussions, some things appear that are difficult to convey, how it influences the families, how it influences people, the whole communities. Honestly, I believe that I was shocked by the level of solidarity among Crimean Tatars. I don't have words to describe my excitement. This is fantastic and important. And one of my tasks, I believe, that international attention is needed to support those people who are there in their homes. So we got a lot of information, and it is really difficult for me to provide the essence of all this. I believe that international attention to the situation will really help, because people find great support among their communities. And I believe that we should do much more for Crimea on the whole. And I hope that we will be able to correct the situation. When you go through Crimea, you see big billboards, solidarity in fight with the terrorism, they say. And you perceive this. You perceive the situation as there is a lot of terror and you should fight with it. And I believe that creation of such an atmosphere that something bad is happening and they try to show that they efficiently fight it. And I see that this hysteria around Hizbut Tahrir, this is to demonstrate the efficiency of activity of state bodies in fight with terrorism and extremism. They would like to show that they are really efficient in this fight. This is one. And the next is, so they use this method to persecute people. There are reasons, there are crimes, but they try to find the reason to bring those to responsibility, those people who do not think alike or belong to some group, that is the group of risk, that is persecuted by the state. This is called political persecutions. And I believe that this terror and extremism motive, this is political order. One more question. I returned from Crimea recently. I would like to make a remark. So you have information also for Ukraine. And of course, there should be simplification of the procedure to get to Crimea. And when I was in Crimea, I saw that people paid bribes at the border with Ukraine. And I saw how it happens. It's not about only simplification of access. We should fight the situation with the bribes at the border as well. If you do not have questions, thank you. This is the end of the briefing, and we wait for the report in October. Thank you, dear colleagues. This was really emotional response from our colleagues who visited Crimea, and then we will have more detailed information. Please follow our news, and of course we will send our final report to you. Thank you.